Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump calling for the arrest of Democratic lawmakers who urged U.S. service members to disobey what they called illegal orders. And Education Secretary Linda McMahon saying the shutdown proved the Department of Education is unnecessary. A House Democrat from Florida faces money laundering charges after a grand jury returns an indictment against her and several others. The leader of the Venezuelan regime, Nicolas Maduro, has offered to step down as U.S. pressure mounts on the deadliest dictatorship in Latin America. The September jobs report more than doubled market expectations, adding 119,000 jobs to the American economy. We have in-depth analysis on the report. Ukraine confirms receiving a U.S. drafted plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The next steps President Trump is scheduled to take. In France, 12 French trade federations and 100 brands are launching a collective lawsuit against Shein. The Chinese platform is accused of unfair competition and regulatory breaches.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
And thank you for staying with us. President Trump demanding the arrest of 6 Democratic lawmakers who urged the U.S. military to disobey the administration's orders. And the Secretary of Education joining the White House press briefing to address what she calls a hard reset of the American education system. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the White House. So Mari, good afternoon. What is the latest from the briefing?
Don, good afternoon. Yes, today, President Trump is calling for the arrest of 6 Democratic lawmakers who earlier this week released a video on social media calling for service members to defy what the lawmakers called illegal orders issued by the Trump administration. The president calls the lawmakers' behavior seditious at the highest level and punishable by death. And in the video, the lawmakers tell the military that they, quote, must refuse illegal orders, adding that, quote, the threats to our Constitution aren't coming from abroad, but from home. The White House condemns the video, denying that President Trump has issued illegal orders, with Press Secretary Leavitt calling their actions dangerous and saying that they should be held accountable for the video. Take a look.
The sanctity of our military rests on the chain of command. And if that chain of command is broken, it can lead to people getting killed. It can lead to chaos. And that's what these members of Congress are essentially encouraging. We have that if this were Republican members of Congress who were encouraging members of the military and members of our United States government to defy orders from the president, this entire room would be up in arms. But instead, it is the other way around. And I think that's quite telling.
Meanwhile, Press Secretary Leavitt was joined by the Education Secretary Linda McMahon in the briefing room today, who's calling on Congress to codify what she calls a hard reset of the Education Department. The department is moving to outsource 6 of its programs to 4 other federal agencies in efforts to, quote, streamline bureaucracy and return education to the states. However, supporters of the education system counter this, saying that that the programs having them under one roof helps to coordinate policy and better serve schools and students. The Education Secretary, however, pushes back, arguing that the 43-day government shutdown only proved that America does not need a federal Department of Education, saying that 90% of its staff was furloughed during the shutdown, but that the education system was, quote, not impacted whatsoever. Take a look.
That's why our final mission as a department is to fully empower states to carry the torch of our educational renaissance. Education is local. It should be overseen locally by those who best know local needs. We're not ending federal support for education. We are ending federal micromanagement and paving the way for education renewal through state reforms like school choice, the science of reading, and restoring the right priorities in higher education. President Trump promised to send education back to the states, and we're keeping that promise.
Meanwhile, the White House is touting the better-than-expected September jobs report, the release of which was delayed by the shutdown. The job growth of 119,000 jobs went beyond the expected 50,000 jobs, but the unemployment rate increased to 4.4%. The press secretary also touts that Thanksgiving gas prices are projected to be the lowest this year since the COVID-19 pandemic, and announces that tax filers could expect an extra $1,000 bump to their tax refunds next year. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thanks for the updates. The United States is expanding its AI technology footprint in the Middle East. A new jobs report is in. The Labor Department says the economy added 119,000 jobs in September, and that exceeds economists' expectations of 50,000, according to FactSet. Here's more.
However, the pace of hiring remains modest. The unemployment rate rose to 4.4%, above the expected 4.3%. The release of the September jobs report was delayed by over a month due to the 43-day government shutdown, which furloughed staff at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Revisions to prior months show slower growth than initially reported. July's jobs gains were lowered by 7%, by 7,000, while August shifted from a 22,000 gain to a 4,000 loss. Combined employment in those 2 months was 33,000 jobs lower than first reported. Vice President J.D. Vance commented on the jobs report this morning while speaking to Breitbart Washington Bureau Chief Matt Boyle. Take a listen.
Huge jobs report, and I assume the market is going crazy right now. It probably just opened, because what this shows is that the Trump economic policies are actually working. And you've got 119,000 new jobs. Economists thought that we would have about 50,000 new jobs, but that's actually just the headline number. If you look below the surface, I think the numbers are actually better. The best thing that you can say about the Trump economy is that American jobs are going to American workers for a change, and that's the thing that I'm proudest about with these numbers.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics said yesterday it would not be publishing an employment report for October. It will combine non-farm payrolls for that month with November's report. That's because the recently ended government shutdown prevented the collection of data for the household survey. That means October's unemployment rate will never be known. November's employment report will be released in mid-December. That would be after the Federal Reserve's December policy meeting.
And joining us now to talk about the latest jobs report post-government shutdown is Joseph Trevisani, economic and currency analyst at FX Street. So Joseph, always good to see you. How are you doing?
We're doing pretty well. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, always a pleasure to speak with you. So can we start with the 119,000 number here? How would you describe the current state of the labor market?
Well, the labor market is, I think, in better shape than people have been concerned about. That number, more than double what was expected, is a pretty good number, especially considering that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is revamping the way it calculates that number. We had that old issue with the birth-death model, which they've largely done away with. So it's a pretty good number, and I would say it looks good for the economy at this point.
Do the downward revisions of previous months worry you?
Yes and no. I would say at this point probably no. And the reason is because the downward revision to many of those numbers has to do more with the way the BLS was calculating certain portions of the non-farm payrolls each month, rather than an actual reflection of the economy. But you're right. If you go back 12 months, 9 of those 12 months were revised down.
Okay, let's talk about the 4.4% unemployment rate. It ticked up. It seems like it's on a rough trajectory upwards for the past few months. How much emphasis are you putting on this data point?
Well, I think the Fed is putting more emphasis on that than they probably are on the non-farm payrolls. And so I would think that would tilt a little bit towards the Fed's doing what they said they were going to do back in September, and that is cutting rates again in December, even though Mr. Powell seems to be talking that down quite a bit lately. But as a reflection of the economy, I don't think it's of great concern yet. However, not at that level. However, the trend is, as you would say, in the wrong direction.
So you brought up the Fed, right? So, I mean, does this report change at all the calculus at the Fed?
It gives the Fed hawks, the Fed inflation hawks, who apparently Mr. Powell is part of that group, a little more ammunition to say we can wait on this. We don't need to worry as much as we were or thought we might have to worry about on the job market, on the labor market, and we can focus a little bit more on inflation for one more month or so. After all, inflation has been ticking up as well. It is, almost a full point above what the Fed says they want.
Do you think inflation is under control? Because it as well has been ticking up in the past few months.
I think inflation is under control, but I think it's also under some amount of pressure as well. Two factors are probably impacting it right now. One is labor costs, as the administration's labor policies and immigration and border policies, again, are going to affect wages because there are going to be less workers around in various fields, and that is going to drive up wages. In addition, you have some pressure from tariffs. Not a lot, but you have some.
Okay, so inflation at around 3% right now, year over year, and wages, according to the latest September report, 3.8%.
That's right.
So what are your comments on workers' spending power? Is it strong or weak right now?
Well, right now it's a little bit, the spending power has been weakening. It was weakened greatly by the bout of inflation that we had under the Biden administration, because wages fell far behind the peak of inflation and the decline into where we are now. It is now at a bit of a balance. What you want, of course, and what consumers want, what voters want, is to get the purchasing power back that they lost through the last administration's inflation. So when you look at it in that sense, it's still relatively weak and it's not strong, and it's not where I think the administration and others want it to be.
You brought up tariffs, and I'm just wondering, what do you think is the current driver of inflation in the environment right now?
It's an interesting question, and it's a difficult question to say. I think there is some impact, although it's difficult to tease it out from tariffs. I have always thought that even though as the tariff regime was put in place by the Trump administration, it always seemed to me that you would get less likely pressure on inflation than many people were concerned about, mainly because there are, in many fields, for many products, there are domestic manufacturers. Why would any manufacturer lose market share in a very competitive market like the United States by giving the full burden of the tariffs to the consumer? The consumer will simply shift to another purchase, and they won't buy from them anymore. So I've always thought that would restrain it. Nevertheless, there is some pressure there. The other, I think, as I said, is from wages and demands, and perhaps even some worker shortages in some fields that are going to push wages higher. So that's kind of the real driver at the moment.
Okay, so given everything you've said so far, could you just give us your overview of the current direction of the economy? Where do you think it's headed?
Right now, I think what we're seeing right now is a bit of a pause. If you look at especially the jobs numbers have, the non-farm payroll numbers have halved on a 3-month moving average from a year ago. They were about 133 last September. It's about 62 or something like that now. So jobs have diminished. You have a very long expansion here. So that is the kind of thing which often runs aground. Can the Fed is concerned about where we are, but they don't yet have any real concrete evidence that the economy is faltering. Yes, jobs have weakened, but that's it. So I think right now what we are looking at is more of the same. It isn't a lot, there isn't a real trend here that's pushing the economy where the economy is going in one direction or another. So even though you look for something that is going up dramatically or going down dramatically, we're not getting that right now. The economy is continuing to trundle along, to muddle through, if you will, and that is pretty good for this stage of an expansion in a mature economy like the United States.
Okay, so speaking of the Fed and how it sees the economy, it's going to meet again next in December.
Right.
And I'm wondering, would it be missing some data when it meets? Because it's not going to get the full October jobs report. Is it going to make a decision with pieces of the puzzle missing?
That's true, they are. But when you look at the way the Fed relates its policy to the economy, they're much more interested, very sensibly so, in trend analysis than they are in particular months. So I don't think that this particular missing labor data is going to matter all that much to the Fed. I really don't. Yes, they're going to be missing November, and they're going to be missing, I guess it would be October and November by the next time that they meet on December 9th and 10th. I don't think it will matter that much. I really don't. So as far as that goes, no, I don't think it's going to make any difference into the way they view their analysis.
Okay, your thoughts on the rate and pace of cuts right now at the Federal Reserve?
I think the Fed probably should have started cutting rates sooner. If you looked at what the European Central Bank did, they did it long before the Fed did. I think whether or not the Fed cuts in December, I think they will continue cutting in the new year. I don't think the economy is remotely strong enough, or inflation is remotely dangerous enough right now for the Fed to avoid trying to support the labor market. I think they will. I think cuts will continue next year.
Okay, just one final question. If you compare the U.S. economy to other economies like the UK, Germany, France, it's doing better.
Much better.
What would you attribute this fact to?
There are a lot of factors involved in that, but especially if I look at some of the manufacturing sectors in those countries that you mentioned, I think one of the biggest problems they're having are the energy costs. Their particular energy policies in those countries have caused electricity prices and other prices to skyrocket. And that is a huge burden on an industrial base. And so that, I think, is probably the biggest problem that they're having right now.
Okay, just one more thing, because you mentioned manufacturing. Manufacturing jobs actually continue to decline in the U.S. as well. And the Labor Secretary acknowledged it, saying it's not been exactly where we want them to be. So if that is the case, then, I mean, the U.S. is not doing well in this aspect as well.
I know, and you're right to point out, because one of the things that the administration and President Trump mentioned repeatedly on for the tariff program that he put in for the tariff policy was he wanted to return manufacturing jobs to the United States to reverse some of the loss that goes back now a generation. I mean, it's 30 years. And that hasn't happened to any really substantial degree. I think the expectations for that were misplaced in time, meaning that it takes a long time for manufacturing facilities, a much greater lead time for manufacturing facilities, for manufacturing abilities to return. And I think that's the problem. You need to keep this particular policy in place for a number of years. All of the trade deals that involve investment here in the United States, and there have been a number of them and spoken about by the administration at length, none of them did any groundbreaking. It takes time to build a manufacturing facility.
Well, all right, Joseph, it's always great to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to come downtown.
All right. Shoppers will have extra time to return holiday gifts this year.
Amazon will expand its return window to make buying online, it says, as seamless and worry-free as possible. For most items purchased through December 31st, returns will be accepted through January 31st next year. Products must be in original or unused condition. There are some exceptions. Some items, like Apple-branded products, can only be returned through January 15th.
More and more Americans are turning to Walmart to ease the burden of higher prices. In its quarterly financial report today, the company said its business in the U.S. is surging and it is gaining market share from rivals. Last quarter, Walmart's domestic sales were up 4.5%. The retail giant saw an increase in customer trips to stores, and more shoppers spent more during those visits. The company also raised its sales and profit guidance, indicating it expects a strong holiday shopping season. Walmart has used its massive size to drive down prices and invest billions into raising pay, sprucing up stores, and building an online shopping logistics network, proving the export of tens of thousands of advanced semiconductor chips. Elon Musk and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang yesterday confirmed the development of a 500 megawatt data center in Saudi Arabia.
So yeah, we're doing XAI and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are doing a
Humane, 500 megawatts, starting with 50 megawatts phase one, and we're doing it with NVIDIA.
We're also working in Saudi Arabia to build supercomputers to simulate quantum computers and using our computers to be the controller and the error correction, quantum error correction, requires an enormous amount of computation, and so we're doing a lot of great work there too.
The Department of Commerce says it has authorized exporting of the equivalent of 35,000 NVIDIA Blackwell AI chips to companies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Those chips will go to the state-run G42 in Abu Dhabi and Humane in Saudi Arabia. Both companies planning major data center expansions. Humane says it intends to buy hundreds of thousands more AI chips as it builds a 500 megawatt facility alongside Elon Musk's XAI. And in the UAE, G42 is planning one of the world's largest data center hubs, built with U.S. and international tech partners. The Trump administration plans to outline details of payments to farmers soon. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said the farm economy is really struggling right now, speaking on News Nation.
Part of that is because of the China refusing to buy soybeans during the trade renegotiations. Of course, that is now opened back up. When China, one country, buys about 65% of your soybean crop, you're sort of putting your own farmers at the, in a bad place if something were to happen.
Under the trade agreement, China committed to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans from the United States before the end of 2025, and at least 25 million metric tons per year in the next 3 years. Rollins said the department will soon be announcing a potential bridge payment for those still facing losses. The National Farmers Union urged Trump last month to issue payments to struggling farmers. It said they were facing severe economic challenges and a deepening crisis if they did not receive immediate assistance. America's transportation system is getting a modern American-made makeover.
Every day, over 60,000 buses move millions of Americans to work, to school, and to other important destinations. By modernizing these fleets, we're not only improving service, we're strengthening our economy by supporting good-paying American jobs.
The Federal Transit Administration is investing $2 billion in grants for 165 projects. The funds will deliver 2,400 buses built with American parts and labor. There will also be funding for paratransit vans. The agency says this will create good-paying jobs, modernize America's bus infrastructure, reduce traffic congestion, and help people travel more efficiently and affordably. The projects span 45 states and Washington, D.C. Mexico's president ruled out allowing U.S. strikes on cartels within Mexico's borders. Joining us to discuss is Taylor Hathorn, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum Center for American Safety and Security. So Taylor, good afternoon. Good to see you again. Now, U.S. officials are saying cartels pose a threat to national security, and President Trump said he's okay with military strikes inside Mexico. But it looks like Mexican President Sheinbaum says she's not accepting any intervention by a foreign government. So firstly, I want to ask you, what do you make of Mexico's resistance to U.S. strikes on cartels, which, are killing both Mexican and American citizens?
Well, it's painfully obvious that the cartel situation and the fentanyl crisis that Mexico is involved in is really embarrassing for Mexico. And it is harmful for the United States and it's harmful for Mexico. So it doesn't surprise me that the Mexican president doesn't want the United States coming in and fixing their mess and having Donald Trump fix their mess that they've created.
So if the U.S. were to have some kind of involvement, what would you want to see in terms of the U.S. taking down these cartels?
I think what every American needs to ask themselves is if this was ISIS or Al Qaeda killing tens of thousands of Americans every year, how would we expect our administration and our leadership to engage with this and engage with these cartels. There's a reason that the president and Secretary Rubio designated these these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations back in February. Now we do have diplomatic relations with Mexico in ways that we don't with other foreign terrorist organizations, but Mexico is doing a little bit to curtail this cartel problem, but they're really not doing enough. And President Trump is having a really serious look at what this means for the United States.
So you said the U.S. is not doing enough. Can you then comment on why these cartels are such a threat to U.S. national security? They have a degree of control over Mexican law enforcement, right? Politics as well, businesses, and significant financial influence over governments as well. So just comment on that.
Well, 90% of the fentanyl that comes to the United States comes through the southern border. And so the drug crisis alone is bad enough. But we've also got the disastrous immigration that has happened over the last 4 years under the Biden administration that is finally being cleaned up. And so you see the tentacles of the cartel in every single one of these areas. And these policies have been disastrous. These consequences have been disastrous to Americans. And now the Trump administration is working diligently to clean it up. The Mexican president has sent 10,000 Mexican National Guard troops to their border. They recently gave us custody of 55 drug traffickers in Mexico to the United States. So some things are being done, but it really isn't enough. I mean, it doesn't equate to the damages that have been incurred against Americans. And many Americans don't know, but we send $100+ million a year through either the UN and through Mexico itself to help curtail this. So American taxpayers are paying for these drugs essentially to come in through these borders because Mexico isn't doing enough with the money and the resources that we're giving them. So the cartel, both the Sinaloan and the Jalisco cartels, are extremely dangerous. They're working with China to get precursor chemicals for fentanyl shipped into Mexico so that the production can be done in Mexico and those drugs can be sent to the United States. So there are just so many levels of this that are harmful for Americans, and Americans need to be made aware of just how bad it is.
So then, can you go a bit deeper into that? You're saying that Americans need to be more aware of this. Can you paint us a picture here so that everyone is aware of the severity of the situation? What kind of dangers do these cartels pose?
So prior to 2019, China was actually the biggest trafficker of fentanyl into the United States, and now Mexico passed that. And that is because China really cracked down on the exporting of actual fentanyl and classified those drugs so that there could be more regulation on that. But what they haven't been able to crack down on, or in my opinion, even tried to crack down on, is the precursor chemicals that are being used to manufacture fentanyl in Mexico, which is being shipped from China. And many of those companies are being supported and stood up by the CCP and encouraged to be able to do that. And so when those precursor chemicals go through the oceans, through shipping containers, they get to Mexico. Mexico often has instructions that were given to them by China and by the CCP in how to manufacture this fentanyl. The fentanyl gets manufactured inside of Mexico. Mexico ships it up through the border. 96% of the seizures of fentanyl that happen at the southern border. So all of this happens, and that's just the actual drugs. You're not talking about the human component, where thousands of Mexicans are killed, Americans are killed because of this drug trafficking that happens. And then you've got the human trafficking component, because all of these cartels also participate in human trafficking. So it's a major human rights violation. I think that the United Nations needs to be doing a lot more in regard to making sure that the Mexican government is held accountable for what they're allowing to take place inside of their country.
Okay, Taylor, just one final question here. And from what you're describing, it sounds like China and Mexico are working hand in hand in this whole situation. But, just a few days ago, China's Xi Jinping agreed to stem the export of precursor chemicals. So, I mean, do you see this as a genuine cooperation on China's part? or just posturing? What leverage does the U.S. have to force China to stop fueling cartel operations?
Well, I mean, only time will tell with what happens with our diplomatic relationships with China. China is still pretty adamant that there's a difference between Beijing and the CCP, and that they will say that they're doing one thing, in reality, what is happening behind closed doors is very different. Only time will tell with that. I think in regards to our relationship with Mexico, we have really strong trade relationships with Mexico. They're our southern neighbor. We can't just disenfranchise and geographically separate from them. So we've got to figure out a way that we can work together and to try to combat this issue. And my opinion on all of this is, whether it's Mexico, whether it's China, whether it's any other nation, that these diplomatic relationships can be repaired, but these countries have to work with us to help fulfill what we are looking to fulfill as well, which is the safety and security of all Americans. And China and Mexico should want that for their citizens as well.
Well, okay, well said, Taylor. And I think everyone would agree that the U.S. and Mexico should work together on this. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. President Trump has instructed his national security team to ready options for operations in Venezuela. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has more on the story.
The Trump administration has made it clear the Venezuelan regime of Nicolás Maduro is a national security threat for the United States and for the region, and cannot be allowed to continue its reign of terror.
America is going to secure our interests in the Western Hemisphere, and at the center of that is dismantling narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and criminal cartels. Venezuela is run by a narco-terrorist ring. The Cartel del Soles is the cartel that runs Venezuela. They are shipping massive amounts of deadly narcotics into the United States.
President Trump has instructed the U.S. military to ready options for strikes on Venezuelan soil, and has also asked the CIA to plan for covert operations inside the country.
Ready to rule out at this point? Are you ruling out U.S. troops on the ground?
No, I don't rule out that. I don't rule out anything. We just have to take care of Venezuela. They dumped. I'm not in love with the people running Venezuela. I love Venezuela. I love the people of Venezuela.
It is not clear what the CIA operations would be for, but President Trump wants all options available to him. The recent strikes on narco-terrorists, the increasing presence of U.S. military in the region, and the clear messaging from the White House is putting pressure on the Venezuelan regime of Nicolás Maduro.
Así que este país está en paz.
So this country is at peace. This country will continue to be at peace. And in the United States, anyone who wants to talk to Venezuela will be able to do so, face to face without any problem. What cannot be allowed, as the evangelical pastor's letter says, is the bombing and massacre of the Christian people of Venezuela.
Maduro has reportedly offered the White House that he would step down from power after a 2-year transition period. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado unveiled this week a freedom manifesto outlining her vision for a Venezuela post-Maduro.
Envision a new Venezuela perched on top of the Western Hemisphere as the premier global energy hub, a symbol of independence and innovation, a new era of ingenuity in an open marketplace of ideas.
Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado remains in hiding in Venezuela and is expected to attend the Nobel Peace Prize award ceremony in Norway on December 10th. 5 presidents from Latin America are slated to accompany her in a show of support from the region to democratic transition in Venezuela. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
On Capitol Hill today, lawmakers exposed the Chinese Communist Party's attacks on religious freedom, emphasizing why the regime's violations pose a threat to Americans. One witness urges U.S. leaders to handle it as a matter of national security. NTD's Melina Weisskopf brings us the highlights.
The CCP fears the power of faith because it is a source of values and moral authority it cannot control.
In search of global dominance, the Chinese Communist Party has sought to deprive people of their own spiritual consciousness. Witnesses at today's hearing expressed why this strikes at the heart of American values and threatens U.S. world leadership.
Their intimidation and surveillance of individuals in the U.S. is a direct assault on U.S. rule of law.
America being able to defend its value abroad also shows America's strength, and if it's not able to defend something that is so critical and so core to American values, then they see that as weakness.
While the attack on faith has been present since the CCP's inception, the severity has only worsened over time. In 2022, Chinese leader Xi Jinping escalated attempts to eradicate the meditation discipline Falun Dafa, also known as Falun Gong, with a special focus on the United States.
The Chinese Communist Party fears Falun Gong more than anybody. Much more fearful of that, as I said, than of our aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons. They fear their own people. Well, why? Well, because they are afraid of losing control. They're not acting like a confident country.
The Falun Info Center reports that the regime is attempting to change public opinion and turn U.S. institutions against Falun Dafa through carrying out nearly 200 violent threats against its adherents, not limited to Chinese diaspora. Attacks have gone so far as CCP proxies attempting to weaponize the U.S. legal system to target a U.S.-based dance company by the name of Shin Yun. It was founded by Falun Dafa practitioners to expose the persecution and to revive traditional Chinese culture. I asked the chairman of the commission, as well as witnesses, what's at stake if Americans don't take this threat seriously.
95% of Americans would find that offensive. Wait, you got communist Chinese intimidating American citizens over Xi Jinping wanting to shut down religion? Here, every human being has in his heart or her heart a sense of freedom, human dignity. If they want to practice religion, you hear about how many Christians are in China? I didn't know it was that big of a number. And that is something that these dictators fear.
And they oppress it, and they oppress it aggressively with billions of dollars that they spent in the most high-tech surveillance systems the world has ever seen. So if they're so scared of religion, we should be backing it. We will change China, or China will change the world. And that's the level and scale of battle we're at now.
Ambassador Brownback is urging U.S. leaders to treat this as a matter of national security and to use tools like economic sanctions to fight for spiritual freedom. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
To talk more on China's oppression of religious freedom, joining us now is international religious freedom advocate David Curry, president at David Curry and Associates. And we have Dr. Weldon Gilcrease, Deputy Director of Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. So thank you both for joining us here. To set the stage, I just want to play a quick clip here from today's hearing on China's war on religion. Listen.
China fears religious freedom far more than they fear our aircraft carriers or our nuclear weapons. They're far more concerned. They spend billions of dollars annually harassing everybody up and down this line here.
You know, David, I'll start with you today. And that clip really resonated. I mean, Ambassador Brownback later went on to say that the Chinese regime is more afraid of losing control than anything else. So do you think this is the main reason for its war on religion?
Absolutely. He's absolutely right. Ambassador Brownback is correct, because the Communist Party fears anything which challenges its preeminence in the hearts and minds of its people. And of course, they have desires to have larger territory, to try to control the world with their ideology. Their ideology is preeminent in their mind. So 100 million Christians in China are oppressed for their faith, not because they're bad citizens, but because their ideology is that the communists are not the most important thing in their world, but their faith is. And you could go right down the list. They persecute Muslims, Uyghur Muslims, others, as well as you heard in this report. So they are threatened by any ideology that challenges them, or any personality. You remember Jack Ma and some of these entrepreneurs who got too big, they'll get cut off at the knees. So it's a challenge around ideology and preeminence in China.
Okay, so Weldon, let me go to you now. Your reaction to the clip and what David said. Why is it that it looks like the CCP and religion cannot coexist?
Yeah, I mean, at its core, at its roots,
communism is based on an atheistic ideology that uses control, uses fear and intimidation to carry out its control. So, for me, it was very telling. I think Ambassador Brownback's comments that they fear religious freedom and those that exert religious freedom within their own country. The Chinese Communist Party fears them more than they fear nuclear weapons, that they fear weapons. I mean, this is what Mao referred to as the paper tiger in the 1940s, was weapons. But I think what we're seeing now is, ironically to me, it is a paper tiger. You have a country and Xi Jinping and a system, an evil system with the Chinese Communist Party that is a paper tiger. They're weak. They've lost control. And I think one of the reasons that religious freedom poses such a threat is because they can tell the real story of what the Chinese Communist Party is. And the Chinese Communist Party is not the Chinese people. It's not the traditions of China. It's not the culture of China. It's not the religions of China. And I think that poses a huge threat because it exposes them for what they really are.
And Walden, I think you touched on something really important here. And what you said was echoed in that hearing. And I just have a clip here from that hearing, and I want to play it right now.
The CCP is no longer satisfied with just controlling churches and mosques. It now seeks to control the entire inner life of its citizens. Its goal is nothing less than to eliminate all independent faith and replaced it with the absolute loyalty to the CCP and Xi Jinping's thoughts.
So Walden, what is it about the CCP's ideology or its rule or anything else that has made it able to carry out atrocities against religious believers for so many decades now?
Well, I think one thing, you have a completely opaque system. I mean, take what my interest is, which is forced organ harvesting. I mean, killing innocent prisoners of conscience, primarily Falun Gong practitioners throughout China, but also Uyghurs, probably Tibetans, Christians, a lot of those that were represented in the meeting or the hearing today. Why are they such a threat, and why has the Chinese Communist Party gone after them, but really stayed kind of under the radar? Well, I think one thing is, after Deng Xiaoping opened to the West and opened the economy to the West, it remains an opaque system. And Americans traditionally, the last few decades, have taken the policy that we should engage with the Chinese Communist Party, whether that's financially, government, the World Trade Organization, or our medical systems. This thought of engagement to build them up economically and give them legitimacy has actually backfired. I mean, we've seen this the last really 10 years. This has come to light that this policy of engagement with an evil system has largely backfired. And I think that engagement is what allowed a lot of these crimes to go under the radar, whether it's the 1989 massacre of pro-democracy students in Tiananmen Square, whether it's the persecution of Falun Gong, whether it's Tibet. A lot of these have gone under the radar because I think the American people and the American government and American institutions have tried to, in good faith, believe that these would stop if the Chinese Communist Party had some kind of legitimacy. But it's only further exacerbated the horrific human rights abuses that they've carried out.
Okay, so David, your thought.
Can I add to that? Dr. Gilcrease is absolutely right, but here's the other X factor, and that is there's never in history been a government that has control of all the information pieces the way they do in China. They can control the internet. They can monitor what you see. They can see where you go, and they track you with facial recognition like has never been seen before. So they can literally put people under house arrest or contain them in ways that has not been possible before on a mass level. So you add that with the points, excellent points that was just made, and I think you have a really toxic mix. So much so to the point that that we know more about what's happening in China than the Chinese themselves do. So it's very difficult for them to gather some kind of momentum to respond when they don't know themselves. Even though they're closest to the problem, they know least about it.
So, David, do you think at all the general public is becoming more aware of the brutality and danger the CCP poses to the rest of the world?
I think you have seen a more bipartisan response to this than we saw, let's say, 10 years ago. I think Democrats and Republicans both recognize there's something sinister about this that wasn't maybe seen widely before. I think what is unclear is how they're going to respond, because to really respond properly, we're going to have to make an effort to make sure through through breaking through the great firewall of China, making sure the Chinese have information to literally just the facts of what's happening so they can make up their own minds. We're going to have to make sure that we are clear about China's role in the UN and other international bodies where they are setting some of the internet rules and the AI rules and all of these kind of things. So they've been very strategic about infiltrating these world bodies to try to make sure that nobody has the ability to censure them or to change their philosophy, even though they're trying to change everyone else's. So hard to know if we'll have the will to respond properly, but I think we must.
Yeah, I think on the point of AI, there's a lot of concerns that within China, as the technology becomes more and more advanced, that the CCP could use it to further repress the Chinese people. So I have another clip here to play for you guys before I ask you the next question.
The Chinese Communist Party fears Falun Gong more than anybody. And I've puzzled at that for the longest time. Why? But it's the most indigenous of all of them. It's like sowing wheat on the Kansas soil. It just grows. They got to 90 million adherents in 7 years. Well, that scares the pants off of the Chinese Communist Party. So we should really be working with them.
So Walden, this next question goes to you because your organization has detailed how the Chinese regime forcibly harvests organs from living Falun Gong practitioners as an execution method. Is there some action the American government can take to stop this shocking crime?
Well, we're trying, we have two pieces of legislation that are currently in the Senate waiting to be voted on against forced organ harvesting within China. I mean, I think this ties back to the whole purpose of this roundtable discussion, which is how are we involved as the United States? How are we involved as U.S. doctors, U.S. medical institutions, U.S. Healthcare systems? And that is that we have largely built up the transplant system within China beginning in the early 2000s after its crackdown on Falun Gong to really be weaponized as a tool of the Chinese regime to kill Falun Gong practitioners, now to kill Uyghurs, probably in the last 8 years, and to also profit off of that. So I think this is why the Falun Gong story remains so essential to understand. The basic tenets of Falun Gong, of truth and compassion and tolerance. And also a lot of the teachings, as Ambassador Brownback was alluding to, are really rooted in traditional Chinese culture, the 5,000 years of culture, not the 76 years of Chinese Communist Party regime, which is largely a foreign ideology that has infiltrated almost like a cancer within the Chinese, within Chinese society, within the minds of the Chinese. So I do think the Ambassador Brownback really pointing out the importance of Falun Gong as part of the story and how big of a threat they are is because nobody survives forced organ harvesting, but those that have survived to tell their stories, Falun Gong practitioners that have been tortured and dehumanized and humiliated by the Chinese Communist Party, they really, again, get at what the Chinese Communist Party really is better than just about any other group can.
Okay, David, any reactions you have so far?
Well, I think he makes a good point. The Falun Gong, it's an ancient Eastern spirituality which China sees as a grave threat, even though they're very peaceful. There's no chance that it's a political movement, although they certainly have sort of made it a political enemy, you might say. The Chinese Communist Party does not like any ideology which challenges its preeminence. And even though there are only a handful of 5 million Muslims, like Uyghur Muslims, they've been attacking them. The Falun Gong, they're attacking them, even though they're very peaceful. You have 100 million Christians, as I said. This is a massive country with a lot of people, but anything which challenges their ideology is going to come under attack.
Okay, well then we got to wrap up now. So if you have any final thoughts real quick you'd like to share right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final thoughts are understand who the victims are. I mean, I think if you understand who the victims are, you understand what the Chinese Communist Party is. And, my last few comments was understand forced organ harvesting, because I really do think it tells you about the character or lack thereof of the Chinese Communist Party and its leaders. And again, understand if you understand the story of the Chinese regime's crackdown on religious freedom, I think you really do understand the spirit and really the evil of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, okay, well then, David, such an important conversation today. Thank you for having it with us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
The U.S. is greenlighting 2 arms sales to Taiwan in a single week, despite China's warnings. The 2 deals total $1 billion. The latest sale to Taiwan, confirmed Monday, is valued at $700 million and includes advanced missile systems. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
The sales also follow weeks after Trump's trade talks with Chinese leader Xi, as the two sides continue negotiating a rare earth minerals deal. Beijing has condemned the previous arms sale, saying Taiwan is the first red line that must not be crossed in U.S.-China relations. 5 days after China's protests, the Trump administration approved the second sale. The advanced missile system would strengthen Taiwan's air defense capabilities. Ukraine has deployed the same weapons to defend against Russia's invasion. These weapons are expected to be completed by 2031. So far in the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. has only sold the advanced missile system to Australia and Indonesia. Taiwan is preparing its citizens for a potential Chinese invasion, spending millions of civil defense handbooks to households across the island this week. The de facto U.S. ambassador to Taiwan says America's commitment is rock solid, emphasizing support for Taiwan to achieve peace through strength. The Chinese Communist Party sees Taiwan as part of China and has pledged to take it by force if necessary. Under U.S. law, America is required to sell weapons to Taiwan so it can defend itself.
In France, 12 trade federations are launching a lawsuit against Shein. They accuse the platform of years of unfair competition and repeated regulatory breaches. More than 100 French brands are now backing the lawsuit. NTD international correspondent David Vivez reports from Paris.
12 French trade and industry federations have launched a landmark collective legal action against fast fashion giant Shein, accusing the company of years of unfair competition, which they say has destabilized retailers across the country. In a statement released this week, the federations said the French retail sector is taking a stand against a business model they argue has long operated outside the rules that applies to companies established in France. They cite what they describe as repeated breaches, misleading advertising, non-compliant or unsafe products, violations of data protection laws, and practices already sanctioned by French and European authorities. According to the industry, these rulings have already resulted in over $200 million in fines.
What we're seeing with Shein's arrival in France isn't a fashion strategy at all. It's a calculated, almost military-style entry into the fashion market. The goal is simply to replace existing brands, no matter the consequences. Shein seems to be copying and pasting retail brands, pushing the entire sector downward. And it's astonishing to see a major department store become dependent on the financial weight of a single client, especially one that's been sanctioned for years.
14 days after Shein opened its first space inside the BHV stores in central Paris, media reports show empty halls and brands leaving the premises. More than a dozen luxury and fashion brands, including Sandro, Dior, Guerlain and Swarovski, have announced they will permanently withdraw from BHV. Levy says many brands refuse to be represented alongside Shein.
For 10 years, we've seen scandal after scandal. The owner of the BHV store should be more responsible.
The case, supported by more than 100 brands and chains, will receive its first procedural hearing on January 12, 2026 at the Commercial Court in Aix-en-Provence. In the worst-case scenario, a court ruling could ban Shein from France. Shein calls the lawsuit unfounded, saying it, quote, resembles more an attempt at a boycott than a serious legal initiative. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Is China's shadow navy training to take over Taiwan by force? Joining us to discuss is Brent Sadler, Senior Research Fellow for Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for National Security. Brent is a former U.S. Navy captain. His final Navy assignment was China branch of Navy staff at the Pentagon. So Brent, such a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for joining us. And just first off, please, if you could tell us what we know from ship tracking data and satellite images about China's shadow navy and how it trains and how that could be used in an invasion of Taiwan.
Yeah, so there's a couple elements of this, and thanks again for having me on to talk about a topic that's near and dear to me for many years. So there's the shadow fleet, which can be like commercial tankers, but I think most important for an invasion of Taiwan would be the car carriers, the ferries. And for the last several years, there's been lots of reporting and even open source reporting, even in Chinese media, the dual-use nature of these ferries that can carry tanks and even launching amphibious vessels from the back end of these car-carrying ferries. And some of those you saw just on the screen. So that's one element. The other is there's a logistics. These are the maritime militia, the fishing fleet that have been trained in military tactics and giving secure radios that you see often in the East China Sea, but most recently and very prominently in the South China Sea. These are used for coercive measures. And if you're blockading Taiwan, these forces might also come into play and most certainly would complicate any military response or Coast Guard response to a confrontation in the Senkakus, which is right now heating up, given the recent diplomatic exchange between Beijing and Tokyo over the new prime minister in Tokyo's Takaichi's comments about what a war in Taiwan would mean for Japan's security.
Brent, are there any concrete indicators that, in fact, that this practice run is for an invasion of Taiwan?
I think it follows a trend. Whether or not it means that an invasion is imminent, I think that is probably hard to judge, and I think we're still pretty far away from that. Not far in like years, but certainly months away from anything realistically like that occurring. I think more likely this is continuing refining of their planning and also diplomatic pressuring and posturing. But for their military, the People's Liberation Army and their Navy, it certainly helps them refine the skills. They've been testing new bridging techniques. This is a mulberry is a type of barge that you bring into shore and you jack up and you lift it up and you can actually move from a ship well offshore via a series of bridging devices very rapidly onto into the land and invasion force. You only build that for one purpose, and the Chinese have built several of these very large mulberries or landing bridging devices, and that's only used for an invasion. And the only place you would use that to invade if you're China is Taiwan. So clearly, the focus of their design of their military, the operations they're doing, the training are all for that purpose.
So keeping those points in mind, the technology, the bridging apparatus, does the Chinese regime have the necessary military capability as of right now to carry out an attack on Taiwan?
I think they've had that capability for quite some time. Whether or not they're successful is a different one. War is perhaps the most risky endeavor in human existence. And so there's never a perfect assurance. I think the leadership in Beijing are really struggling with understanding how would Taiwan's friends in the region, the United States and Japan, respond in a conflict over the future fate of Taiwan. It's an uncertainty that I think is holding them back, but they have a very sizable military. They have spent a decade plus building up their arsenal of weapons and missiles and rockets so that they could launch and sustain for quite a long time, in the order of several years, a war with the United States and others over the fate of Taiwan.
I don't want to say that China is hesitant on attacking Taiwan. Maybe it is. But what do you think are the considerations that it's weighing, whether to attack or not? Would it become a weaker country at the end of this war?
Well, it really matters how the war is concluded and how much damage is done in the process. I mean, for the United States and Taiwan, it could be a Pyrrhic victory, which means we've defeated an invasion and a takeover of Taiwan, but yet we are so weakened that we can't rebuild fast enough or faster than the mainland Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. And we find ourselves in another war that we just can't resist. This is what there's a historical, the Pyrrhic Wars between Rome and Greece. We want to make sure we don't have that. So we have to think more than just one fight, but we have to think through a potential war, what comes out the other side if we can rebuild fast enough, if we are victorious. But it will be a long fight, no matter what.
Okay, Brent, another thing, you've written about China's distant water fishing fleet and how it could enter American waters, if it hasn't happened already, that is. What is this, and what's at stake here?
Yeah, so this is a very troubling vector of attack, or for facilitating a lot of illicit activities, and also enforcing or exercising influence over some weakened governments and also smaller Pacific Island countries. The distant water fleet, you've got a fleet of about, say, 7,000 to 10,000 fishing vessels that the Chinese mainland operate all over the world, from the Gulf of Guinea, off of West Africa, off of the coast of Argentina just recently. There's a fleet right now off of Peru, and they're just outside their waters. At least that's what we're led to believe by the AIS data that they're transmitting. But of course, this illicit fleet does poach in other people's waters. They've been caught time and time again manipulating the AIS systems. This is an automatic transponder that transmits the location and the identity that's required by international law for any vessel greater than 1,000 tons. And so they turn it off. They actually register. They use the copyright, or they copy the transponder, and they use it in multiple vessels. So what it looks like on the digital domain as one fishing boat is actually 10 or 20. And so they're cheating on the margins. They are clearly fishing in other people's waters, and they're engaged in illegal activities already by fishing in other people's waters without their permission. Does not a far stretch, and there's anecdotal evidence that these fishing fleets from time to time engage in other illicit activities, one of which that I've heard about is stories of trading in counterfeit cigarettes. So why not fentanyl? Why not other illegal narcotics as well, if there's money to be made?
Well, okay, Brent, we always enjoy hearing your analysis and insight. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On Capitol Hill today, lawmakers exposed the Chinese Communist Party's attacks on religious freedom, emphasizing why the regime's violations pose a threat to Americans. One witness urges U.S. leaders to handle it as a matter of national security. NTD's Melina Weisskopf brings us the highlights.
The CCP fears the power of faith because it is a source of values and moral authority it cannot control.
In search of global dominance, the Chinese Communist Party has sought to deprive people of their own spiritual consciousness. Witnesses at today's hearing expressed why this strikes at the heart of American values and threatens U.S. world leadership.
Their intimidation and surveillance of individuals in the U.S. is a direct assault on U.S. rule of law.
America being able to defend its value abroad also shows America's strength, and if it's not able to defend something that is so critical and so core to American values, then they see that as weakness.
While the attack on faith has been present since the CCP's inception, the severity has only worsened over time. In 2022, Chinese leader Xi Jinping escalated attempts to eradicate the meditation discipline Falun Dafa, also known as Falun Gong, with a special focus on the United States.
The Chinese Communist Party fears Falun Gong more than anybody. Much more fearful of that, as I said, than of our aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons. They fear their own people. Well, why? Well, because they are afraid of losing control. They're not acting like a confident country.
The Falun Info Center reports that the regime is attempting to change public opinion and turn U.S. institutions against Falun Dafa through carrying out nearly 200 violent threats against its adherents, not limited to Chinese diaspora. Attacks have gone so far as CCP proxies attempting to weaponize the U.S. legal system to target a U.S.-based dance company by the name of Shin Yun. It was founded by Falun Dafa practitioners to expose the persecution and to revive traditional Chinese culture. I asked the chairman of the commission as well as witnesses what's at stake if Americans don't take this threat seriously.
95% of Americans would find that offensive. Wait, you got communist Chinese intimidating American citizens over Xi Jinping wanting to shut down religion? Here, every human being has in his heart or her heart a sense of freedom, human dignity. If they want to practice religion, you hear about how many Christians are in China? I didn't know it was that big of a number. And that is something that these dictators fear.
And they oppress it, and they oppress it aggressively with billions of dollars that they spent in the most high-tech surveillance systems the world has ever seen. So if they're so scared of religion, we should be backing it. We will change China, or China will change the world. And that's the level and scale of battle we're at now.
Ambassador Brownback is urging U.S. leaders to treat this as a matter of national security and to use tools like economic sanctions to fight for spiritual freedom. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani is preparing for his first meeting with President Trump. Mamdani told reporters that his supporters and Trump have common ground.
New Yorkers who voted for Trump ended up voting for our campaign. And they did so because they're looking for leaders to actually deliver on the cost of living crisis. That's why everything comes back to making the case for an affordability agenda. I will meet with anyone. I will speak to everyone, so long as it could stand to benefit an economic agenda for New Yorkers.
President Trump announced that he would host the mayor-elect in the Oval Office. The meeting is set for tomorrow. This will be their first face-to-face meeting since Mamdani was elected. Ahead of the meeting, Mamdani told reporters today that he will be sharing the experience New Yorkers are having right now with the president. He said much of that centers around affordability and economic security. A federal grand jury in Miami returned an indictment against a Florida congresswoman and several others on Wednesday, charging them with stealing $5 million in federal disaster funds. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
Florida House Democrat Sheila Trefillis McCormick is facing criminal charges after a grand jury on Wednesday returned an indictment against her. According to a press release by the Department of Justice, the indictment charges the congresswoman and several others with stealing federal disaster funds, laundering the proceeds, and using the money to support her 2021 congressional campaign. The alleged stealing occurred through the congresswoman's family health care company. The company is accused of receiving an overpayment of $5 million in FEMA funds. The congresswoman represents a large portion of western Palm Beach County in the U.S. House of Representatives. She was elected to her third term in Congress in 2024. She'll face a Democratic primary challenge next year from 26-year-old Elijah Manley, who has called for her resignation. Trefillis McCormick is the first Haitian-American woman elected to Congress from Florida. If convicted, she faces up to 53 years in prison. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Former Vice President Dick Cheney's funeral was attended by former presidents and political figures on both sides of the aisle. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more from the memorial held in Washington, D.C.
Former Vice President Dick Cheney's funeral was held at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. An invite-only crowd attended, including former President George W. Bush, former President Joe Biden, former Vice President Kamala Harris, and Cheney's wife Lynn Cheney and daughter Liz Cheney. Cheney served as White House Chief of Staff for President Gerald Ford in the 1970s. He represented Wyoming in the House of Representatives from 1979 to 1989. In 1989, George W. H. Bush designated Cheney as Secretary of Defense during the U.S. invasion of Panama and the First Gulf War. In the year 2000, Cheney was selected to be former President George W. Bush's running mate, and after winning the election, Cheney served as Bush's vice president for 4 years.
Dick Cheney was like that, sparing and measured with words. In a profession that attracts talkers,
He was a thinker and a listener.
Cheney played a key part in the Bush administration's war on terror after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Cheney was also an early advocate for the controversial invasion of Iraq. He also went against the Republican Party in 2024 by endorsing Kamala Harris for president over Donald Trump. And Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, also served on the January 6th committee. Vice President J.D. Vance comments on Cheney's passing.
My condolences go to Dick Cheney and his family. Obviously, there are some political disagreements there, but he was a guy who served his country. We certainly wish his family all the best in this moment of grieving.
After a prayer, Cheney's casket was carried out of the National Cathedral by 8 military body bearers. Jason Blair, NTD News.
The September jobs report more than doubled market expectations, adding 119,000 new jobs to the American economy. We have in-depth analysis on the report after this break. Ukraine confirms receiving a U.S. drafted plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war. This marks the first confirmation of the American plan, which was only previously attributed to anonymous sources. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastar has the details.
We are thankful to President Trump.
Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev on Thursday. Zelensky says the two discussed options on how to end the fighting in Ukraine. Ukraine confirms that the U.S. successfully drafted a new peace plan. A statement reads that the President of Ukraine has officially received from the American side a draft plan. In the coming days, the President of Ukraine expects to discuss with President Trump the existing diplomatic opportunities and key points. Shortly before Ukraine's confirmation, Russia denied reports of having drawn up a new peace plan. Moscow did confirm that Russia is in contact with the US, but added that the current process can't be called peace consultation. Citing anonymous sources, Axios first reported on the American plan, which the outlet says would include major concessions from Kiev to give up occupied territory. The European Union's foreign policy chief also weighs in, saying Europe has to be involved in the plan.
Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear.
She added that discussions should start with a ceasefire at the front line. This would allow for negotiations to discuss Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. The foreign policy chief added that the question of security guarantees also has to be resolved. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
This year, it might be more cost-effective to get a real Christmas tree. 83% of households plan to put up an artificial tree. But nearly 90% of artificial trees come from China, and tariffs are driving up prices 10 to 20%. Real trees are a different story. 84% of growers say they're keeping wholesale prices steady, and some are lowering them. That's according to a Real Christmas Tree Board survey. Growers reportedly say supply is strong nationwide, so this season, the classic real tree may offer the rare gift of a better deal. The Christmas market in the German city of Magdeburg is open, almost a year after a horrific car ramming attack that left 6 people dead. This morning, more than 140 stallholders opened their booths, offering festive items and holiday treats. Here's what some local residents had to say.
As I saw, they've put up quite a few bollards or barriers and such to prevent that from happening again. However, I think you always have that in the back of your mind.
Of course, you shouldn't lose your sense of fun in life, but you also shouldn't forget what happened, so to speak. That's for sure. Definitely.
Why should you let that get you down? There's no need. And besides, it's sufficiently secure here. Nothing can really happen anymore.
5 women and a boy died in last year's attack. Many more were wounded. Earlier this month, the suspect in the attack went on trial. The 51-year-old has been charged with 6 counts of murder and 338 attempted murder. He could face a life sentence if convicted.